Hello and welcome back to Desperate Living. Now, long-time viewers of this channel, that is people who go back a few months, may recall us reviewing this fantastic Columbo box set. The entire 1970s collection, the classic collection we might call it, of Columbo on Blu-ray. So, an impressive collection of 20 discs covering the whole of the original run of Columbo. A must-have item. But of course, for those of us who do love Columbo, there's always been one particular conundrum. What do we do about the 1980s, 90s and 2000s episodes? The ones that ran from 1989 to 2003, and which, for the sake of brevity, I'm now going to just refer to as the 90s Columbo. These shows have never had a great reputation, and for many of us, they've not really been an essential purchase in the way that the original shows are. However, if you're a completist, then you want them all. And I now have them all. Freshly released are the final years, as the box calls it, 89 to 2003. So 12 discs, a total of 24 episodes, which were shown at a somewhat sporadic scheduling during these times. Big gaps between them quite often. Seasons would last maybe 3 or 4 episodes, maybe a little bit longer, but never had quite the momentum of the original show and never had quite the reputation of the original show either. However, maybe it's time to look at these afresh. Well, I've done that and I'm going to let you know my thoughts. But before we do that, let's actually just have a look at what's in the package. Now, as you can see with the original Columbo box, each season comes in its own disc case. Can't really do that here because the seasons just aren't long enough. It would be kind of very sporadic looking box. No reason to do that at all. So instead, rather sensibly, they come in these two rather thicker cases with the Columbo as he aged somewhat, represented here. If you want to be a pedant, you can point out that they probably got the pictures the wrong way round. The clearly older Columbo here maybe should have been on the second volume, discs 7 to 12, rather than the first one of discs 1 to 6. But you know, that's splitting hairs, quite frankly. Inside, they're pretty much the same. Both packages. The only difference being that there's the booklet in the first box that covers both sets, and this is like a little kind of episode guide to let you know what's on each disc. Although it doesn't actually let you know what's on each disc because you know, they're literally just listed as episodes, so you know, you still kind of find out as you put them in. But you know, you can probably work it out. 24 episodes, 12 discs, 2 a disc. So the final years, the later years, however you want to describe them, have never really been loved by Columbo fans or by anyone else really. And you know, there are good reasons for that. These shows are clearly made on a much reduced budget compared to the 1970s shows. They're a lot less fun. They have far fewer big name guest stars. Not that that really matters, but there's always the fun thing of recognising familiar faces, and even in supporting roles, as people like Vincent Price would have, you know, not even playing the main villain, but somebody maybe second or third in the cast list. That doesn't really happen here. There are a few exceptions. You know, there's the infamous episode with Faye Dunaway, of all people, probably the most famous person ever to appear in Columbo. Not the best episode, has to be said. We'll come back to that in a moment. But quite often it's sort of second string television stars, familiar faces perhaps, but not exactly famous. More to the point though, the show kind of plays fast and loose with the Columbo format. So Columbo was a How Catch 'Em show rather than a whodunit. We knew who the murderer was from the off, and the fun was seeing Columbo essentially chip away at their alibis and their defences and lull them into a false sense of security with his kind of bumbling, folksy style, only to show that, he's far smarter than they gave him credit for. That's the joy of Columbo, in a way, just seeing how these rich and powerful and important people are brought down through their own hubris as much as anything else. In these later episodes, the format is switched around from time to time, never successfully. So the two most infamous episodes, both based on Ed McBain novels, nothing wrong with the Ed McBain novels. However, they're not Columbo stories, and trying to graft Columbo onto these tales it's a fool's errand. For some reason, Peter Falk thought that these might work as Columbo stories, but neither of them even follow the format. Undercover literally sees Columbo going undercover. No Time to Die sees him investigating the kidnapping of his niece. In both of these stories, we don't get the rather kind of polite, bumbling, seemingly scatterbrained Columbo that we see in regular episodes. He's a lot more focused, a lot more aggressive, and there's an interesting aspect to this. Maybe it shows that the Columbo that we see generally is playing a part. He's doing his whole shtick in order to disarm and throw off the person who's investigating, to make them think that he's a fool, so that they will give things away. He's putting them at a sense of ease that they shouldn't really have. But that's the only defense I can really think of for those two episodes, that they show what might be the genuine Columbo behind the act. However, they don't work as stories. They're just not effective. Columbo as a character seems wildly out of place in them, and they're just not fun. Equally, we have It's All in the Game, the aforementioned episode with Faye Dunaway, where she plays a seductive woman who seems to be falling for Columbo, and worse still, he seems to be falling for her, which is a bit out of character for somebody who the show has established over the years is completely devoted to his wife. In fact, one of the better episodes is Rest in Peace, Mrs. Columbo, where, again, the format is slightly tweaked. Columbo's wife is under threat from a psychotic murderer trying to get revenge against Columbo for the conviction of her husband some years earlier. However, at least that kind of works really well as a narrative, and it doesn't stretch too far away from the Columbo format. Other interesting episodes include Butterfly in Shades of Grey, which sees the return of William Shatner, this time playing a kind of radio shock jock, right-wing rebel rouser. Having a lot of fun with the role, as you can imagine. Shatner is an acquired taste, as we know, but I quite like his ability to go over the top and not take things too seriously, and he bounces well off Peter Falk. Other familiar names from the 1970s series coming back here include Robert Culp, Patrick McGoohan, who both stars in and directs a couple of episodes, and George Hamilton. And while it's fun to see these familiar faces, their episodes are generally quite hit and miss. Shatner's is fun, McGoohan's are variable, Hamilton's is, again, not too bad, but not the best. There are some curios here too. Uneasy Lies the Crown was a project that had been rejected in the 1970s and then previously filmed as an episode of Macmillan and Wife, so why they felt it necessary to go back to that particular story. It's actually not bad. I quite like that one, the story of a demented dentist. But you wonder, if it wasn't good enough in the 70s, why is it good enough in the 1990s? And I think this is the problem with all these shows, that maybe there's just less quality control taking place. As I said, the budgets are lower. They just don't look as nice. They have that kind of 1980s, early 1990s visual that makes everything look oddly cheap. And Columbo himself is a bit of a mixed bag in these shows. Obviously, as we get to the later episodes, Peter Falk is getting quite old and was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, which perhaps doesn't help his portrayal of the character. But sometimes Columbo does seem like he's suffering from dementia. That's the only way you can really describe it. I mean, he seems beyond scatterbrained and more just confused and a bit batty, which is a real shame. I think obviously Peter Falk was doing a good job of keeping Columbo going, but I think maybe he needed somebody else to step in sometimes and say, this is not right for the character. Maybe that wouldn't have worked. I'm sure Falk obviously would say, with good reason, that he knew the character better than anyone else. But Billy Connolly pops up in the episode Murder with Too Many Notes, which feels very much like a kind of second-string version of the classic episode Etude in Black with John Cassavetes from the 1970s. Connolly plays a music composer, a film score composer. Again, it's not awful. So here's the thing about these episodes. When you look at them afresh, perhaps with lowered expectations, then they turn out to be a lot better than you might have thought. I mean, yes, the production values are lower, the stars are less impressive, the running times are a little bit too long, everything feels a little bit padded out, quite frankly. However, there's some really fun ones in here. And if we just look at these on their own merits, then you might actually enjoy them a lot more than you thought you did. There are some terrible episodes. Murder in Malibu is bad. But, there are some pretty good ones too. They still work in the classic Columbo format. And it's always fun seeing the character on screen, especially when Falk seems to actually be having fun, maybe bouncing off somebody like McGowan, who he clearly works well with and gets on with as a person. There's an interesting attempt to pull Columbo into the modern age. Often it doesn't work, as in the cases of the Ed McBain novels, which were clearly an effort to shift things about a bit. There are attempts to bring in younger villains. There's an episode where there's a Steven Spielberg clone, effectively, who's the killer. The second time that Columbo has kind of riffed on Spielberg. They did the same in the 1970s. Of course, Spielberg had directed the first Columbo episode, so I'm sure it's all done in good humour. But equally, there's the episode where Columbo goes up against a Hugh Hefner type magazine publisher. An interesting one in the fact that initially Columbo has the wool genuinely pulled over his eyes and is beaten by the killer. But of course it all works out well in the end. There's episodes about sex therapists, about rock stars, about nightclub owners. So you can see that there was an effort made to appeal to a younger audience. Of course, Peter Falk was getting older with each episode, so I'm not quite sure how that worked out. Who knows what would have happened if Columbo had carried on? Maybe the unthinkable could have happened and Falk might have been replaced. There is obviously the possibility that Columbo could be revived at some point. There has been talk of this, obviously, and I know that Dirk Benedict played Columbo on stage in the UK and by all accounts was very good in the role. But these episodes kind of show that even by the 1990s they were struggling to kind of keep the format going. Maybe we're in a different age of television now, of course, so maybe Columbo would work well, although I'm not sure how it would fit with the modern style of detective show, which obviously is very dark and dour and takes itself very, very seriously. Columbo might be just out of place still. However, I'm going to say that if you've been previously ignoring these, as I had, then they're probably worth picking up. Obviously, if you can only buy one Columbo box set, this is the one to get. But if you're a big fan of the show, like I am, these are probably a nice little addition. Not the essential episodes, but, you know, more Columbo, and we can never have too much. As you can see, the boxes sit nicely together. They follow the same design. They're more or less the same size. And they'll look perfectly fine together on your shelves. Now, I'd ignored these for years. I previously had the Columbo 70 shows on DVD, but never felt the need to buy these ones. If I turned on the TV and saw Columbo was on, and then it turned out to be one of these, I would usually just kind of flip channels or move on. I mean, I'd seen them all and had never been that impressed. But watching them again, you know, through the eyes of somebody who wasn't expecting anything from them, I've been sort of pleasantly surprised. I mean, the worst ones are awful, no question of that, but the best ones are probably up there with the second string Columbos from the original show. And a second string Columbo was still far better than most other TV shows' top episodes. So that's not a bad thing. So I'd say, if you're a Columbo fan and you've been ignoring these, give them a go. You've got little to lose other than the cost of the box, obviously. But you might be, like me, surprised that these are a lot more entertaining than you remember. Not great, but certainly nowhere near as awful as their reputation might suggest. So those people who in the comments on my previous Columbo piece said that I was being unfairly harsh to these later episodes, I agree, you're right. Hopefully this has made up for that error in judgment. So if you enjoy these looks at old movies, old TV shows, new movies, new TV shows, assorted aspects of popular culture, then make sure to like, subscribe, share. Everything helps. We've got to keep this channel growing and moving, and your encouragement encourages me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.